This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me on the show today is Dr. Carol Achenbach's other podcasting half, Dr. Christopher Lynn of the University of Alabama. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. I'm super excited to have you here. I first found you because of your Sausage of Science podcast. Here is some free advertising for you. Anyone who is listening, you should also listen to their podcast. It is excellent. And that got me curious about you. And I went and looked you up on your website and I started reading your publications. And you have quite the breadth of areas of study, sir.
I try to stay as broad and hard to nail down as possible.
Listeners, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that Dr. Lynn is studying, he has, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-ish ongoing areas of research according to his website. And they range from tattoo studies, which is why I was initially excited to talk to you, because I got my first tattoo a couple years ago now, maybe. I can't remember because the pandemic has made me forget how time works. I think it was a couple years ago. Yes. But stuff like looking at that and immunity and tattooing and social signaling, which we're going to dig into, but you also look into teaching and being an anthropologist.
Mm-hmm.
What is the purpose of firesides? Like, why are we so attracted to them as humans? Sexuality, sex, and behavior, belongingness and religious ecology, anthropology is elemental, psychom, it's nuts.
I love it all. It's why I do anthropology, because everything fits under that broad umbrella. It's so exciting to be in this discipline. And it's an unfortunate time for folks to realize our relevance, right? The pandemic has made it all the more clear what anthropologists do. We work on the margins of so many things, but I love that. So I like that we're relevant. I wish there wasn't a pandemic for folks to realize it, but yeah, I try to encourage my students and colleagues to have that breadth and then to find the connection. So I'll be happy to, while it sounds broad, to provide some insight into how those things all sort of connect together.
Yes, I think it's really important for people to have a great deal of range, because I think that something that I notice a lot in the business world, but I've also seen in academia, is that people have become so deeply specialized into a single topic that they lack the ability to think creatively or imaginatively for tackling a problem or a research challenge in their field, because they just don't have anything else to draw on. And they don't collaborate with other people who think differently than they do. So
it's true.
Here's my simultaneous plug for anthropology being the magpie's discipline and also diversity and inclusion in anthropology.
For sure.
2 birds, 1 stone. I would actually love to hear how all of your disparate fields of study tie together, if you have an elevator pitch for me.
Well, cultural impacts on health is the main area. And so all the research that I do is cultural impacts on health. So you name some things that are projects, which means I'm doing outreach projects, or I started an evolutionary studies minor, things like that are more programmatic. But in terms of the research, it's always been cultural impacts on health. I started off studying Pentecostalism and speaking in tongues, but I was interested in transcendence and how that influences stress. I used a similar model from that research to start studying. Oh, someone's sneezing in behind me. That's my dog if you're picking it up on mic.
I am. He's so cute.
So, I've studied everything from speaking in tongues and stress response to improvisational comedy and how that impacts anxiety and stress, to, in American Samoa, we looked at cultural knowledge around Zika and how the cultural knowledge was impacting the public health rollout. Fireside relaxation stuff comes from thinking about how the role of fire in human evolution is underappreciated when we think about our own cognition and what it is that we do around domestic fires now, which is less cooking and more relaxing, and the importance. I guess you could look at one motif is, you know, we are we're all suffering the con side of consciousness or awareness. So if we think that consciousness and awareness has adaptive benefits for understanding our world better, we also have to recognize that the corollary is, and it should be poignant right now, is knowing about all the suffering in the world is heavy. It weighs heavily on our souls. As an academic, I see it all the more in students who we're actually training to ramp their anxiety and depression up. And when I say that, it sounds horrible, but we're asking them to be critical thinkers. So we're asking them to really hone in on their web thinking. Like, how is this political or economic thing affecting that and creating social inequities? And the more we encourage them to think like that and become citizens of this global world, we're increasing their awareness, and the consequence of that is our anxiety about solving those problems increases. So as a consequence of all those things, we turn more to varieties of cultural resolutions to that stress and anxiety. Religion is perhaps one of the oldest ones. Art may be among the oldest ones also. Like, if we're thinking about some of the things that are sort of hallmarks of anthropology, we think about when culture arose and why it arose. And one of the things that I would argue is that one of the things that singularly binds all sorts of cultural practices together is to help us dampen those anxieties created by being a highly complex social species with a lot of awareness about a lot of problems.
Yes, I'm picking up what you're putting down. Sometimes I look at my little dog napping behind me in the middle of this pandemic, and she is so happy and oblivious. And I'm like, what would it be like to be a little Chihuahua dachshund sausage dog chilling out? That would be wonderful. But I also really understand what you're talking about in terms of training people in such a way that it ramps up their anxiety. This is something that you see, especially in academia, but in all kinds of creative fields where you have like a constant critical eye, right? Like, you're constantly looking at things and critiquing other people's work and saying, this is good, but it could be better by doing X, Y, Z. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 years into my life as a professional editor where I realized that I was enjoying things significantly less, because every time I looked at something, I was like, this is fine, but this is how I would do it instead of just being able to enjoy it. So I've had to, like, very consciously go about divorcing my work life from my personal life, because otherwise I was just so deeply unhappy all the time,
Mm-hmm.
which is terrible. Circling back around, can you tell me a little bit about your tattooing project?
Sure. You want to know the cooling of the earth version or where I am now?
Ooh.
The cooling of the earth version is the long version, how I got there. The now is I have an NSF grant to do a thing, and it's on pause for the moment, but what would you like to hear?
I would love to hear the long version.
Okay. So I started off getting interested in tattooing back in high school, and I'm almost 50 now. So tattooing wasn't hugely popular when I was young. I don't remember seeing people who were tattooed, but it started to creep into popular media. I mean, it was becoming very, very popular, and I got tattooed when I was in high school, and then when I was in one of my intermediate college dropout phases. Like, I went to college, dropped out, went back, dropped out, went back, dropped out. One of those phases, I had grand designs to be an editor and a publisher, and some of my friends and I started to interview tattoo artists and try to tell a story. We wanted to get involved in that community, and that that kind of stayed with me. And one of the in talking about like bringing having disparate interests. One of my superpowers as a grad advisor is to take someone's academic desire and their personal hobby interest and try to marry them so that they enjoy the work that they do. And so as soon as I started grad school, I started, and that was looking at biocultural medical anthropology or whatever that institution called it. That's what we call it here at Alabama. I started thinking, okay, how can I pull in all of my former interests? I used to be in music distribution and play and bands and stuff. So I really wanted to like keep that life and also be an academic. And I started looking into the research on tattooing and health, tattooing and evolution. And I found there's tons and tons of research on the cultural side, sociological side of things, and on the dermatological impacts. There were a few evolutionary studies that used the human relations area files and tried to discern patterns in the ethnographic record, but most of them fell flat. And
I'm just going to stop you real quick. The human relational area files, this is a huge database that was put together by anthropologists that have just it's kind of like a world fact book for all kinds of cultures all around the world. I have some listeners who don't really do anthropology, so it's important to describe.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's why I didn't use the abbreviation. So we would always, in the lingo, we would say HRAF, right?
HRAF, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a database of like ethnographic or even adventurer studies from all over the world, and what they were looking for was patterns of disease and tattooing, right? So one of the hypotheses that was really interesting was that maybe tattooing is going to be correlated with disease rates, and that tattooing may be something that people get done to show either one, their commitment to their group as warriors, or something that they do to prove that they're able to withstand dangerous circumstances. And some of the literature suggests that where disease rates are higher, you need more demonstrations of commitment and health among your people, right? You need to know that they're loyal. And so there was this prediction that where disease rates were higher, you might find more tattooing or scarification or other things that would subject people to harm in a world that's very dangerous, right? The idea of getting a tattoo now to show that you're tough doesn't sort of hold up, because it's really easy to put some numbing cream on or go get antibiotics or something like that. But that was the idea. It didn't bear out in the HRAF because the frankly, probably the database is incomplete and no one was necessarily thinking along those lines when they collected those data. But we saw, and I say we, I think of my lab and my students, we saw an opportunity to do a study that took that idea and did it with real people, right? So what would we see if we looked at the relationship between health outcomes, for instance, and tattooing? Do people who are either healthier get tattoos to show that they're healthy? In other words, do their tattoos heal? Good, clean, well done tattoos that heal nicely, look shiny and beautiful, and they're attractive, and ones that scab up or don't heal well, or if someone is sick when they have a tattoo, tend to look splotchy, right? Would we see a relationship there? And the way we thought to test it is, we know from anecdotal reports that people who have a tattoo that they love, that they think looks good, tend to go and get more. So on the one hand, there might be this relationship between getting tattoos and baseline being healthy, right? And that was suggested by a paper that came out in 2009. Koziel is the name of the author. I can't remember the first name, but it came out in Human Evolution and Behavior. And they looked at fluctuating asymmetry, which is the idea that we are our bodies are symmetrical on both halves for the most part. We're supposed to grow arms and legs and everything that are equal length, but there are always deviations from that symmetry. The more health problems you have, the more what they call fluctuating asymmetries you have. So they had compared fluctuating asymmetries to tattooing in that study and found that people with more tattoos were more symmetrical, suggesting that there was a link between health and tattooing.
Interesting.
We thought, okay, an indication of health is one thing, but does the tattooing itself, because it's an injury on the body, maybe that also plays a role? I think of tattooing as analogous to exercise
Okay.
or vaccinations. There's two ways I sort of think about this, and we're still piecing out if it is in fact homologous to, not just analogous to, like tattooing doing something like a vaccine, or is it doing something like exercise? And the reason I think about it that way is if you haven't exercised for a while, you go to the gym, you work out, you're going to be really, really sore. And that's your body basically responding to a stressor that's unfamiliar. And the way your immune system will respond is the classic fight or flight response, wherein it's going to shut down non-essential systems and amp up systems that are needed for responding to danger. Now, part of that response is cortisol, which is a stress hormone, goes up. And cortisol is supposedly related to your immune system in that it shuts down or suppresses immune responses that aren't necessary while you are in the process of escaping that danger. In other words, cortisol should go up, immune response should go down if it's a new stressor.
Right. And this goes back to human energetics. We've had a few people come on the show who have talked about energetics, like Dave Reichland and Herman Ponzer. The idea is that the body has a limited number of calories it can use every day. And if you are trying to run away from a tiger, you really need those calories to run. Like, it's not useful to use those calories to grow a baby right at that moment or to fight off a cold. It's more important for you to outrun that tiger to survive right now in the moment. So based on having that limited caloric wallet or budget, you think that tattooing could be related to that?
Yeah, but like running away from something is an actual danger. We have many cultural practices that we do that stress the body, but they aren't dangerous. We're doing them for health reasons or for cultural reasons. So our immune system is flexible. It's got some generalness to it where it misfires sometimes, but it learns that something that you do over and over again is not necessarily dangerous. And so if it is a stressful situation that you experience repeatedly, we see what I think if we're using the allostasis model for stress response, which is dynamic homeostasis in an environmental context, your immune system doesn't have hard and fast set points that never change. It has set points that shift based on your life experience. And so if you exercise a lot, your body's like, okay, we got to stop shutting down the immune system. That's not good. We're going to keep the immune system going. This is normal stress that we're used to. Same thing with tattooing is what we think, right? So if you get lots and lots of tattoos, people say, yeah, the first one hurt a lot, but I kind of don't even feel it anymore. Or it feels like after the first few, my body would just heal really, really fast. So we started thinking, well, maybe there's an allostatic response. Maybe the body gets used to this stressor. And much like exercise, instead of being sore afterward, you get those health benefits that we suggest are associated with exercise. So that's the model that we use. It came straight out of exercise science. And so in exercise science, one of the ways that they look at the impacts of elite athletes, people who are exercising at high rates and who have a lot of upper respiratory tract infections, is they use immunoglobulin A as a biomarker because immunoglobulin A lines the gastrointestinal and respiratory tract. So it's at that front line. It's produced very, very quickly and at a high rate. So it's probably metabolically expensive. It's the one where if you're not getting enough sleep because you're studying for finals or whatever, it's not being produced enough, and you're more subject to getting a cold or something like that. And it seems to have been highly conserved in vertebrates. Easy to sample, and salivary immunoglobulin A is reflective of circulating immunoglobulin A, meaning that you're measuring it from your mouth, but it actually may reflect what is circulating in your system and responding to injuries like a tattoo.
So if you have a lot of immunoglobulin A, it means that your body is under some sort of, or your body at least thinks that it's under some sort of immune threat. And if you have
Correct.
lower levels, that can be either because your body doesn't have enough resources to produce it, or because your body's like, everything's copacetic here.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay. So what did you discover?
So what we did is we measured immunoglobulin A and cortisol by a saliva sample at the beginning of a tattoo and at the end of a tattoo. In our first study, we've done a very similar model every single time. And what we find is that the immune system works exactly how we think it works. It is not even remotely rocket science. It is the most basic finding, like, yeah, stress and immune response work just like everyone says they work. With tattoos is no different than with exercise. We see immunosuppression if someone has very low tattoo experience, and we see people's immune system working great if they have a lot of tattoos. That's been based on 2.5 studies. And when I say it that way, it's because we have 2 published studies and we have analyzed part of the data from our third study that's unpublished. So the first one was conducted here in Alabama. The second one was conducted in American Samoa. The third one was conducted at a Polynesian tattoo festival in Seattle. And then 2 summers ago, I spent time collecting a shit ton of data on people getting traditional Samoan tattoos in Samoa. So I have not finished analyzing the last 2 field seasons. But so far, even the stuff that I've looked at but not published has been consistent, telling that same story.
So 2 things. One, I think that sometimes people get null results or results that back up whatever the scientific establishment says it ought to be. And they're like, well, darn. But that is the incorrect response, because a null result tells you something, right? It tells you that you're barking up the wrong tree. 2, if you do get a result that backs up what everyone else is saying, that's also really important. That's a really important part of science, because if we don't test other people's conclusions, we won't be able to figure out if someone has something wrong, and we won't be able to push the field forward. So yeah. I think it's really cool what you're doing, and I think it's exciting that it's backing up what the rest of science says. Just to get a little bit more clarity, when you say the immune system's working exactly the way it ought, you're saying that people who have low tattoo experience, so functionally people who have 1 tattoo previous to getting another tattoo, someone like me, mm-hmm. If I were to go get a second tattoo, I would probably experience an increase in immunoglobulin A, because my body's like, I don't know what's going on. We're getting attacked by angry needles.
Not till later.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you have low tattoo experience, your cortisol is going to go up, right? Because you're getting attacked by angry needles, right? So it's going to correspond to your pain level. Your pain and your stress are like what we call stress, we think of psychosocially, but it's also the physical stress, which we experience as pain as well, right? Your cortisol is going to shoot up, and it's going to tell your immunoglobulin to not happen. So in your example, your immune system is suppressed during the tattoo, and once the tattoo is done, it's going to go up.
Okay. And then if I had a lot of tattoo experience, full sleeves, what would happen?
Your cortisol may go up because it may still hurt, but there's a dissociation between whatever mechanism is between cortisol and immunoglobulin A. So that's one of the things we still don't understand well, is what's the pathway by which cortisol production tells immunoglobulin A what to do. What we see is they're both going up when people have a lot of tattoos. So cortisol is going up, indicating pain and stress, but your body's also like, yeah, we're fine. We're going to go ahead and repair stuff right now. So immunoglobulin A stays in production.
Interesting. So your body's stress response is almost, I don't want to say blunted because you're still getting that cortisol response, but it seems to be that your body seems to understand that energetically it's not as much of a threat. And so it can continue with normal function.
Seems decoupled in some way, or that there are enough intermediaries. What this term hasn't been used a lot of late, but in that allostatic system, they used to say the homeostats were the mechanisms of homeostasis. And so anything in those two systems that are communicating with each other are homeostats. So somewhere in there, and this is really the gist of why I do this research, tattooing is cool, and that's why people pay attention. But what we're really interested in is how culture impacts our stress and immune systems and what interactions are going on. So we have a better window onto that. And tattooing just provides a great one in that regard.
Yeah. And tattooing is a deeply cultural practice. And it's something that humans have been doing for literally millennia.
Literally.
If you ever want to look at some cool tattoos, like you're just out of ideas, you can look at Otzi the Iceman.
Brad Pitt has Otzi tattooed on his forearm. Really? He really does. Yeah. And he has the picture of Otzi laying. It's the outline, I think, with the line showing where his tattoos are.
That's wild. Okay, well, you can be cool like Brad Pitt after listening to this show. Just, run out to a tattoo artist post-pandemic, preferably.
Oh, I laugh. Keep from crying. Yes.
No, this is really interesting because I think that this is something that the show hasn't really focused on in the past, but there are a lot of cultural components to health that we don't really think about.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those are socioeconomic, right? So if you are in a position where you don't have a lot of power, that has tangible health results for people. And then there's also, like you said, cultural practices that we inflict on ourselves that have tangible health results for people, and we just aren't aware of them. And if you're not aware, then there's nothing that you can do to fix them or take advantage of them if they're beneficial.
Yeah, one of the other pieces of this that's so fascinating is not just what the tattoo itself does, but as you point out, the cultural resonance that these have. And one of the reasons that I've been doing the work now in the Samoan Islands is because it is one of the few places in the world where there is a continual tattoo practice that's still culturally embedded. And so it hasn't become, as with a lot of the tattooing practices, unanchored. Right. So just as an example, I talked to Maya Sialuk, who is a Greenlandic Inuit tattoo artist who I talked to a few indigenous tattoo practitioners who are trying to, I wouldn't say recover because there's no way to recover previous practices, but who are exploring tattoo practices that were lost due to colonial suppression. And part of that is giving their people an anchor to a shared identity. And there's something that seems to be important about a shared identity that motivates people to get tattoos in general, because they get them to affiliate themselves with certain groups. And beyond the mechanisms of immune response and cortisol, one of the things that we're interested in Samoa is how important is embodying Samoanness or Samoan identity through wearing this tattoo, because we know it has not just symbolic meaning, but ritual meaning. It means you can do certain things in the culture. It says who you are and who you're affiliated with, or who has deemed you important enough to allow you to get this big tattoo. It's hard to measure those things, but anthropology provides some of the methodology and the tools. We have the toolkit to try to tackle a project like that. So that's the current project, is working in Samoa and putting together the biological pieces with the cultural pieces, and how what models people hold in their minds and use to direct their behavior feeds back to influence their health outcomes.
Definitely. I think that what it ultimately comes down to is you're studying something that there's a cultural effect on your biology, and then there's a biological effect on the culture. And looking at that interaction is, I think, like peak anthropology, like the most interesting work that you can do. One of the things that really was interesting to me in your work and is interesting to me in general is this idea of costly signaling, right? So
Mhm.
this is something that you see in nature all the time, which is that animals, we're animals too, choose to do something that at first glance might seem to harm their ability to survive and reproduce. But
Mhm.
by doing it, it's signaling to potential mates or to other people in the group or other animals in the group that you're really healthy and that you should be either left alone, that you don't want to fight with them, or that you want to reproduce with them. I actually, in grad school, worked in this lab where we studied swordtail fish, which is as phallic as it sounds. And these are these tiny little fish. They're like 2 to 3 inches long, and the males have a projection on their tail. That's why they're called swordtails. And what the researcher discovered was that female swordtails preferred male swordtails with bigger swords, even though those males tended to be slower, and it also cost them a lot more energy to build the sword on their tail that they could have been using for other things like reproduction. But it was a sign of their fitness that they were able to procure food and to grow to that size, that it signaled to the females that they were healthier than potentially their brethren. The twist is, though, that I didn't have to do this, but her grad students did. She would show basically fish snuff films to these female swordtail fish. It was horrible that she would put like TV monitors all around them so the fish couldn't get away from the movie, and they would have to watch another swordtail fish get eaten by a larger fish, a cichlid.
Yeah.
And after watching that video, the females would then prefer males with smaller tails who were more agile.
Mm.
But barring circumstances of predation, like the natural inclination of these females to swordtail fish was to go for the costlier signaling mechanism. And in humans, we see this too. Testosterone is actually an immune suppressant,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of the traditionally attractive things about men, right, are like the big square jaw and the low voice, and those are all things that testosterone contributes towards. So basically what men are saying, quote unquote saying, with their manly jaws and low voices is like, I am so healthy that even with all this testosterone making my big square jaw square and big, I can still be super healthy and my offspring will also be very healthy. This is a very long way of getting around to tattooing, which can also be a costly signal.
That's what I've been exploring. We have some limited evidence so far to suggest that, right? Because we have, on the one hand, the signal, and looking at this relationship between tattooing and health does, in fact, injuring yourself on purpose show off your health, right? That's the costly part is you injure yourself, and it's costly in terms of metabolic energy. It's also it costs you money. These are thousands and thousands of dollars people have invested. So it's conspicuous consumption, and it's also the biological cost, right? We get like that's why tattooing is so great, is because I can't even unpack a metaphor without falling onto another metaphor. But tattooing seems to be preferred by people who are exhibiting healthy responses, as our data show in the biological pieces. And we did another study of who might be tattooing themselves to show off, right? So if it is an indication of fitness, we were thinking, okay, who are fit people who get a lot of tattoos? And we were thinking maybe it's athletes, right? So we see athletes everywhere. And I'll just for those who don't know, I'm at a school where we win national championships in football almost every year. So our football program is without question, among the best in the world for the whole time I've been here. Our basketball team is doing that this year. Our gymnastics team is unparalleled. Our adapted basketball is unparalleled. So University of Alabama has a really good program by which to test this hypothesis. So I did but the other side of that was, well, that's showing your biological fitness, but what about the people who want to show their commitment, right? Because signaling theory, on the one hand, this costly honest signaling that you mentioned is about the biological fitness, but we also have another type of signaling, which is your commitment to your group and what are you willing to endure. And so these could also fall into what they call hard to fake signals of commitment, right? Like you can't fake that you're an Alabama fan if you have an Alabama tattoo, right? So it's hard to fake. You have to get a temporary tattoo and people can rub that off. So that's the principle there. So we were wondering, well, maybe those kind of tattoos and tattooing in general might be more common among non-athletes or people who aren't already known for their fitness. Maybe people who play intramural or just your run-of-the-mill person who works out will they need an extra signal to show off their fitness. So we did a really short epidemiological survey of tattoos, piercing, medical complications, intercollegiate athlete status, and maybe a few other things. It was literally like you could do it in 1 to 5 minutes and send it out to I think we have a sample of like 500 people nationwide at first, but I wasn't convinced that it wasn't unbiased. And I also wasn't convinced that I had a representative sample of intercollegiate athletes, because when it came down to it, I didn't know how many intercollegiate athletes are actually at any given university, right? So we redid the study by emailing it to all 31,000 undergraduates at the University of Alabama, right? Which you can do, apparently. I found out as a professor at the University of Alabama, it's completely legit. And I got a response. I got 6,500 responses. So low response rate considering the number of people I surveyed or I sent it to, but high number for in terms of statistical value. And I got 250 intercollegiate athletes, I believe, which is half of the number that are at the university. So it turns out I got a really great response rate in both cases. And what we found is that there's not a huge disparity in terms of who's getting tattooed, right? It's not that athletes in general are getting more or less tattooed, but football players do have more tattoos, at least at Alabama, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of costly honest signaling, the finding was in looking at the medical complications, right? So one of the things that we also asked is height and weight so we could calculate BMI. And BMI is a really, really rough approximation of health because there are a lot of problems with it. If you're high in muscle mass, you may be technically categorized as obese, which doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Right. But in terms of a rough metric, it was useful. And what we found is that people who were athletes had a much lower chance of having a medical complication than people who were athletes. So people who are athletes are healthier, having a healthier response. And we found that BMI had a strong correlation. If your BMI is overweight or obese, you are at a much higher risk for having medical complications related to your tattooing. So in other words, if we circle back around to what I said at the beginning, like a well-healed, shiny, beautiful tattoo shows you're healthy, and one that scabs up shows you're unhealthy, then we have a costly honest signaling model wherein you're trying to get a tattoo to show you're healthy, but it backfires because it scabs up and now you have this gross thing. I don't know. I don't want to go on record and say that's exactly what's happening because of the survey nature of it and the correlation, the problems with correlation. But the data support an interpretation along those lines.
That's really interesting. Are you planning on testing this further in the future?
Would love to. It's always about resources, right? So I am putting out the call that we want more students to come here at University of Alabama or wherever you are and do more research. The idea that there had been no one testing, and I'll throw out this for anybody who's thinking about any ideas along these sorts of lines. One of the things I've found out about studying things that are obvious and intuitive is that they're not as obvious and intuitive and well understood as we may think they are. I thought that after that first study, I would never do another tattoo study, that there wasn't anything left. And as soon as that piece went out, all these questions and queries came in that sort of opened my mind to other possibilities. So we have a lot of threads to chase now, and I don't have enough people to chase them all. I would love to study that. So I just need more.
What are some questions that you would like to pursue, but you are not able to right now?
Well, I've been focused exclusively on Samoans because Samoans they have this continual tattoo process or this continuity culturally, but there are indigenous tattoo practices all over the world now that are springing back up. There are different types of tools that people use. There's everything from the electric guns that we're accustomed to stick and poke, to threading, right? So there are different types of things. We're interested in what role age plays in this, right? People who are younger have healthier immune responses. What happens with the trade-offs of life history as you get older and your body's like, you're not reproducing, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, what's your immune system like then? We don't know. People who are immunocompromised often write to me to ask me, should I get tattooed? Is that going to make it worse? Or based on your research, will that help my immune system? Like, we really don't know a whole lot about immunocompromised people and how that has happened and what sort of things you can do to treat yourself. So there are tons of public health avenues to pursue.
Yeah. And now I'm thinking about what about people who aren't just immunocompromised, but people who have autoimmune diseases, right? Where your body is freaking out and attacking itself for no reason. I think actually real quick, can you talk about what a tattoo actually is?
Yeah, tattoo is a wound on the body that injects a pigment under the surface. And what seems to be happening, and based on one study, there's another avenue of research. One study of tattooing mice is that the macrophages, which they're the immune homeostats, let's say the immune mechanisms that literally eat invaders. The macrophages seem to eat the pigment and then die and stay in place and are then themselves considered still invaders with a foreign substance. And macrophages just keep eating and then dying, and they just remain there in the system. So the pigment seems to be actually held in place by the activity of the immune system right under the epidermis.
Yeah, which is wild.
Yeah.
If you just say it's just a bunch of dead, hungry immune cells.
And how little we know about that just blows my mind.
Mm-hmm.
All the dermatological science has been focused. This is the reason I started doing this research, is because it was all focused for 100 years on your risk of cancer, your risk of looking like a floozy, right? There's all this stuff that suggests that you're a criminal or promiscuous or a drug. I mean, this comes straight out of the 19th, early 20th century criminological studies using tattoos taxonomically to be able to code for and detect deviance. So we've moved beyond that to some extent, but the research hasn't. People just haven't thought, let's stop studying the relationship between tattooing and deviance and look at actually people have been doing it since well before Ötzi. So let's see why. What benefits are we getting from that? I have a colleague in the UK, Becky Owens at Sunderland. She and I had started working on a scoping review of the psychological studies of tattooing. And this isn't novel. I'm sort of catching up with some sociologists who sort of already knew this, but from an anthropological perspective, we didn't. But what's apparent is all these psychological studies will ask things like, how many tattoos do you have, and how much sex do you have? I don't know what they're asking to get at these correlations. But what they're missing is the intermediate mechanism of personality, which is openness to experience, right? We could chalk up getting tattoos to something like people who are open to experience, which is one of the big 5 personality traits that are looked at. But instead, they're jumping over that to tattooing to make a case that tattooing is still somehow associated with deviance. So there's just a lot of bad science out there, and a lot of room for good science to step up, including our own. You know, we've been labeled as pseudoscientific when our first study went viral because we only sampled 29 mostly women in Alabama. And I completely agreed with that. That's why we replicated that.
Yeah.
My voice just, did you hear me get louder and louder and louder? I'm getting very passionate.
That's good. That's what we want to hear. That's why I bring people like you on the show, so that people can hear from the actual person doing the research and see how interesting and exciting it really is. I think there's no substitute for hearing from the horse's mouth, like why what you're doing is exciting. Like I can sit here.
I do have a horsey mouth, don't I? Especially today. Looking a little horsey.
No, but yeah, I think it's really important to hear from scientists directly. And that's part of what you're doing with your podcast as well.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully this podcast will reach some people who are maybe just experimenting with science, as we might say. I know that a lot of listeners are already interested in anthropology or anthropologists themselves, but if you're listening to this and you know someone whose interest might be piqued and who might not otherwise think a lot about science, send them this episode. Anyway, it is time for the final 3 questions of the interview. Are you ready?
Yeah, I feel like there should be some music or something.
Perfect. I'm just going to take that sound and start putting it in all of my future podcasts.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Then it'll be good. It'll be good. I'll harmonize our 2. First question, if someone wants to learn more about the kind of work you do, just like an intro to biocultural anthropology, where is a good place for them to start?
The website is the best place because all the projects in the lab and everything are up there, and you can see some pictures of it. But I am also on all of the Grams and the Twitters and Facebook. I'm not on TikTok yet, but our department's going to start one. So there's all kinds of places like that. But the podcast, the Sausage of Science podcast, is literally every week. So there's like way more to digest there than anyone could possibly digest, including me. I don't actually listen to all of them back, but I do sample them here and there.
Yes, it is a very good show. Strong recommend on that. And I wish that I could do this every week, but I have too many other jobs.
It's a lot. It's hard.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Don't set that bar for yourself.
No, it's interesting because I have had some people reach out to me who are interested in starting podcasts, and they're like, anthropology podcast, which I think is great. And they're like, what should I know? And I'm like, just, it's all about time management, and know that it's a lot more work than you might originally anticipate, especially if you're doing all the editing and production yourself.
Yep.
Side note, if you're interested in starting a podcast and you want some advice, I'm on Instagram. Feel free to DM me at anthrobiology, and I will try and answer your questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that too. And I'm Chris_LY. But I will say since we talked mostly about tattooing, I have an Inking of Immunity Facebook page, an Inking of Immunity Instagram account, and an Inking of Immunity Twitter account. And we post everything about our research up there. We post our new podcasts when they come up. It's easier to Google them. They're not exactly the same across all formats, but Inking of Immunity is the brand.
Awesome. Great. So that's a variety of resources that you've just provided for listeners. Second question, what are you reading for work right now?
I just read a great thesis by a master's student She did so I'm not reading anything like for class or anything like that, but I read her thesis. I'm trying to pull it up I think it was from stigmatization or from stigmatized to empowered. And it was an examination of cultural models of identity and witchcraft in New Orleans. And she did a fantastic job.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Is that publicly available?
It's not publicly available, but hopefully it will become publicly available. But that my lab's work is even broader than mine personally, is what that says.
And what's the name of the student? Give her a little shout out.
Her name is Emmy Smith.
Emmy Smith.
Or Emmy Stormborn. She started the project in a pandemic and finished it in a tornado the other day. We had tornadoes shooting through and we were all hunkered down doing a thesis defense on Zoom.
Oh my gosh. Good job, Emmy. We're really proud of you. Third question. What are you consuming for fun right now? It can be anything, books, TV, podcasts. Some people have said hiking.
Yeah, I do all of those things. So this one's harder to answer because I have too many. I'm looking to see what the name of the book is. I just finished the whole Octavia Butler series that was being advertised so widely during Black History Month, and I love her work so much. I listen to tons of audiobooks and also podcasts. The one I'm listening to right now is by Ken Follett, and it's called World Without End. I get into all the medieval Game of Thrones-y type of stuff. I'm also an avid gardener. I built myself a greenhouse earlier in the year, and on Sunday, I burned my garage down by accidentally lighting my compost piles on fire. So that's
so sorry. That sucks so bad.
It sucks a little bit bad. My wife and family are not super stoked about living in a hotel while our garage is rebuilt and smoke has been remediated out of our house. But it's an adventure.
For anyone listening out there, compost and also poop piles are highly at risk for lighting themselves on fire. It has something to do with the way that the gases get trapped. This is a huge problem at horse barns, which I worked at for a long time. So we had frequent discussions about how big the poop was and whether or not we thought it would light on fire if we waited another week for it to be taken away. It also gets into poop landscaping, which is another option for something to do if you have a ton of horse poop and you don't know what to do with it.
Oh my God, that would be the dream. I would love to have lots of horse poop to spread in my backyard. My wife would also love that.
Go to your local barn and I'm sure they'd be like, sure, go ahead, bud.
Yeah.
Because whatever you take away, they don't have to pay for someone else to haul.
Well, see, here's what happened. I was collecting yard trash from all my neighbors and built up such a hot pile that then when I put some cold ashes on it, there was a spark somewhere down there in the middle of it. And that sucker went up in 15 minutes. We had just stepped away and I was bolting back and rescuing chihuahuas and huskies. It was quite a thing.
Well, I'm glad you're all safe.
While listening to my book. And what are we watching? We're watching Treme. Speaking of disasters, I mentioned The Wire earlier. I love, what's his name? David Simmons.
Oh, David Simons. Yeah.
I love Simons. Yeah. So the depiction of the complexity of political economy, I think, is represented in The Wire par excellence. I love that show. It's my favorite all-time show. Treme, I love for the music. I'm a music hound. It's not as compelling of a show, but I still love it. And we watched what's the one called about the porn industry on 42nd Street? Deuce. The Deuce. That's the newest one. We watched that before that. So all great shows.
There you go, everyone. This is just like a barrage. We're talking about a barrage of COVID information. Here's a barrage of recommendations.
I am constantly consuming stuff. I'm one of those people who's like got a earbud in all the time. I listen to all of my articles and PDFs and books. And as with you, right, I'm always doing prep for the next podcast. So I'm listening to all of Herman Poncer's book Burn. I'm listening to all of Exercise by
Dan Lieberman.
Lieberman, in a week, so that's a great way to keep up with workflow. And I guess I did just listen to those for work. So those are the recent ones. Exercise fucking kick
It was
ass.
so
That book
good.
is so
It was so
good.
good. And actually, I really liked Burn too.
Yeah, I thought they did great jobs knitting things together. I want to throw out one more book because we interviewed Evolution's Bite by Peter Unger
Oh, yep.
at Arkansas. That book's a few years old, and so we didn't specifically interview him about the book, but we interviewed him about the death of Alan Walker and then talked to him about his work. But I read that, I thought that book, and I don't do teeth, but I thought, oh my God, this is so well done and knits everything together so well. So
yes, if you want another tooth book, and I strongly recommend getting the actual physical copy of it because she's done full color illustrations throughout that are incredible. Dr. Tanya Smith, the Tails Teeth Tell.
Oh yeah,
so good, so good.
I just heard a Leaky Foundation podcast interview with her about that.
She's so freaking nice too. If you ever get a chance to interview her.
Well, the trick is always to interview nice people and not mean people because they're more fun.
I'm going to start sending people a questionnaire ahead of time and being like, are you nice? Because if not, get out.
Well, that's a good idea because we've interviewed a few people who are like, I don't really know why I'm on here. And I'm just like, I thought I was here to help you promote your work, but fuck it. You don't want to be on here.
Sorry, everyone. We've just like completely gone off the rails. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time and your honestness and your excellent perspective.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking. I love to talk, as you probably discerned.
Of course, you are welcome to come back anytime you want.
What I know, I'll take you up on that.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show is produced by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.